All right, let's get right into it. Today we've got a showdown between two heavyweights of the digital world. In one corner, you have the reigning champ, the technology that powers pretty much everything you do online, the traditional database. And in the other corner, the disruptive challenger that everyone's talking about, blockchain. But what is the real difference between them? And more importantly, why should we even care?
Well, it all boils down to this one huge question for our modern lives. How do you actually trust anything online? In a world where information can be copied, tweaked, or just flat out deleted in an instant, how do we know what's real? Both databases and blockchain are trying to answer that question, but as you're about to see, they take completely opposite approaches. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the core problem of trust. Then, we'll explain each technology in simple terms. After that, it's time for the head-to-head showdown. We'll check out some amazing real-world examples, and finally, we'll talk about the hurdles and what the future might hold.
Okay, so before we can really understand the challenger, we have to get to know the reigning champion. I'm talking about the traditional database. This is the unsung hero that's been running the show behind the scenes for decades on pretty much every website, bank, and app you've ever used.
So what is a traditional database? At its heart, it's a centralized system. The best way to think about it is like a library with one all-powerful librarian. This librarian, the database administrator, is in charge of everything. They decide who gets to see the books, they can change the records, they can even remove books entirely. It's super efficient, it's organized, and for a very long time, it's been the only way to do things.
But here's the catch with having just one librarian in charge. What happens if that librarian makes a mistake, or if the library itself gets targeted by a thief? That's what we call a single point of failure. The whole system is vulnerable. And, the biggest thing is you have to put all your faith in that one librarian, trusting that they're honest and they're not going to mess with the records. This is the exact problem that blockchain was invented to solve.
And that brings us perfectly to our disruptive challenger. See, blockchain came onto the scene with a totally different idea. An idea built not on trusting one person or one company, but on a system that removes the need for that kind of trust altogether. So, what in the world is a blockchain? Well, instead of that one librarian with one librarian, I want you to imagine that everyone in town gets an identical, magical notebook, and whenever a new entry is made, it instantly appears in every single person's notebook, all at the same time. And here's the most important part. The magic ink is permanent. Once something is written down, it can never, ever be erased.
Okay, magical notebooks sounds cool, but how does it actually work? It might seem complex, but it's really just a few steps. First, someone wants to add something to the notebook. That's the transaction. Then, a whole bunch of computers on the network all look at it and vote to make sure it's legit. That's called consensus. Once they agree, the transaction gets bundled into a new block, which is then locked onto the previous one, creating a chain. Finally, that brand new, longer chain is sent out to everyone, updating all the notebooks at once. Now, the real secret sauce here, the thing that makes it all so secure, is this kind of digital fingerprint called a hash. Every single block gets one, and it's completely unique. And here's the clever bit. Each block's fingerprint is also linked to the one before it. So if anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to go back and change something, even a single comma, the fingerprint breaks, the chain snaps, and the entire network immediately knows that something's fishy. That's what makes it immutable. That's the magic. Okay, so we've met our two contenders. Now it's time for the main event. Let's put them side by side and really dig into the key differences that set them apart. If you boil it all down, this is what it comes to. A database is all about centralized control and records that can be edited. Blockchain is about decentralized power and a history that is set in stone. They are fundamentally different philosophies for how to handle information. This chart just lays it out perfectly. You can see the obvious differences in how they're built and how data is handled. But look at this row right here, performance. A database is way faster because it doesn't have to wait for a whole network to agree on something. But that speed comes with a trade-off, right? It has that single point of failure, which blockchain gets rid of completely. So at the end of the day, it's a choice. Do you need speed and centralized control, or do you need distributed security and trust? All right, enough with the theory. This stuff can sound pretty abstract. So where is blockchain actually making a difference out in the real world? Let's look at a case where its unique powers really get to shine.
So let's talk about Walmart and food. When there's a food contamination scare, say E. coli in lettuce, finding the exact farm it came from is literally a life or death race against time. The old way, with messy paper trails and separate systems, could take a whole week to track a single head of lettuce back to its source. A whole week!
So Walmart teamed up with IBM and built a food tracking system on a blockchain. Now get ready for this. The time it took them to trace a package of mangoes from the shelf all the way back to the original farm went from nearly 7 days down to just 2.2 seconds. I mean, come on, that is an absolute game changer.
So how on earth did they do that? Well, it's because every single step of that mango's journey, from the farm to the truck to the warehouse to the store, was recorded on that unchangeable shared ledger. It creates a perfect digital audit trail that everyone can see and trust. It's not just about being fast. It's about creating a single source of truth that helps reduce fraud and costly errors.
And it's not just about groceries. We're seeing this same idea pop up everywhere. In finance, it's making international payments way faster and cheaper by cutting out the middleman. In healthcare, it could allow for securely sharing your medical records with different doctors. People are even exploring it for things like digital IDs that you control, for real estate, and for building more transparent and fair voting systems. The big idea is always the same: replacing a person you have to trust with technology that you can verify.
Now, let's be real for a second. Blockchain is not some magic fix for everything. The technology is still pretty new, and it's facing some pretty big hurdles before it can really go mainstream.
Probably the biggest challenge is what tech folks call scalability. That whole process of getting everyone to agree can sometimes cause a traffic jam on the network, making things slow and expensive. Some of the older types of blockchain, like the one Bitcoin uses, also use a staggering amount of energy. Plus, let's be honest, this stuff is complicated to understand and build, and governments are still trying to figure out what the rules should be.
But the good news is the space is moving incredibly fast. A big part of the solution to that speed problem is something called Layer 2s. The easiest way to think about these are like express lanes that are built on top of the main blockchain highway. They let you bundle a whole bunch of transactions together off to the side, and then settle them all back on the main road in one go. It makes everything much, much faster and cheaper.
So where does all this leave us? Well, the future probably isn't a battle of blockchain versus databases where one has to win. It's really about picking the right tool for the job, which brings us to the big final question. Is our digital world going to be run by those centralized librarians or by these new decentralized magical notebooks? Or, what's probably most likely, is it going to be some clever and creative mix of both? That's the future that's being built as we speak.